Yeah, that's crazy, man. That was a while ago, wasn't it? It was probably pushing 6 years ago. That was like 2017 summer, I think. That's wild. Yeah, and before I get started, I just want to say, like, you guys are so blessed here. Josh is the real deal, you guys. And I got to plug into Sunday school this morning. For those of you that weren't there, that don't have a baby that's napping at 9 a.m., like, go to Sunday school, you guys. Like it was great this morning. I just was so blessed by your words this morning and going through that time with Elijah, and I don't get that often. I don't get to be a part of what you guys get to be a part of every Sunday. I'm up here, and so it was such a blessing. So thank you. But Josh is the real deal, you guys. Like I don't want you to take him for granted, not even a single bit, because it's not like that everywhere. Some people just want to make a name for themselves, and Josh is up here because he loves Jesus and he loves you guys, and it shows. It shows in his family, and it shows in what you guys are doing here at the church. So thank you for letting me a part of this morning. And like he said, you guys were our very first church. How many of you guys were here like 3 years ago? Okay, quite a few of you. Thank you for being here, you guys. You guys have faithfully supported us ever since that day, and so thank you. Because I want to share a little bit about what's going on in Sri Lanka. And these aren't just Jake and Sam's stories. This is Sioux City first in Sri Lanka. Okay, you guys, and I know that sounds like, oh yeah, missionaries are supposed to say that. These are our stories. Like, I don't know how to make that more real for you, you guys. We can't be there if you guys aren't supporting us. Like, you guys are as much a part of this story as we were. And we are, okay? So just hear that from me, guys. Let's roll on to the next slide. I did share a little bit, I guess, that we are Jake and Sam. Yeah, I mean, you shared that. And so we do have a son. His name is Liam. And we have a daughter, actually, that's going to be born in December, which is why I made a very difficult decision to leave Samantha and Liam at home back in Dubuque, Iowa, because it's getting harder for her to travel as a pregnant woman, and our son is just so tired of these long trips. So I left them at home. But I wanted to show you guys where Sri Lanka is. For those of you who don't know, my wife had to Google it when I told her I think we're supposed to go to Sri Lanka. And so that's where it is on a map, just south of India there. And Sri Lanka is mostly a Buddhist country. There's a lot of Hindus there, and there's also some Muslims. So it's a mix of religions, but it's such a beautiful place. And so I want to just give you a little recap of our story. We can go to the next slide there. Oh, no, I'm going to tell you about Live Dead first. That's right. We are on a Live Dead church planting team. How many of you guys have heard of the Live Dead movement? So many of you guys. You can see what they're about here, church planting amongst unreached people groups through teams. But that name embodies so much more than just church planting in teams, you guys. I mean, that it should be our Christian motto for each and every one of us, to live dead. Because Jesus didn't come so that we could live for ourselves. He came so that we could live for others, right? To die to my wants, my needs, and my feelings daily. It's easy in some ways. Like, I wish it was this simple. Like, I've met people. Now, we talk about people all the time that when they choose to follow Christ, that could cost them their actual life in these other countries. That's real, by the way. And I've met some of those people. And sometimes I battle with this. It would almost be easier if I could just choose to follow Christ and they would cut my head off. You know, because then I'm just dead. I get to go be with the Lord. You know, that sounds crazy, but it's like, and I don't envy those people when they have to make that decision. I'm not trying to make a joke of this, you guys. But the reality is, it's very difficult to live dead daily and to die to those little things that we have to die to. My wife and I, before we became missionaries to Sri Lanka, we had to look ahead and count the cost. What would that cost us to make this decision in our life? We weren't going to live near our family or our friends. You know, our kids wouldn't have their grandparents right next door or even in the vicinity. And so there's all these things that we counted the cost and said, Jesus is worth it. These people that I'm going to share about today, they're worth it. But when it came time over there to pay the price and to continue to pay the price to go back, like, that's kind of where that rubber meets the road. That's kind of where live dead becomes real, is dying to these comforts that we have here that would be so much easier to plug into. And the school year just started, and one of those things I didn't realize that I would be dying to was this reality of my son getting on a yellow school bus and going to school. Like, my wife and I will never see that. And it sounds like such a silly thing, but there's all these little things that we grieve the loss of as we become followers of Christ. And I don't want you guys to like belittle the things that you give up as a Christian here. Hopefully, your life has changed to the point where you have lost some things to follow Christ. If it's not costing you anything to follow Christ, you should question whether or not you're following him. And so I'm going to get off that soapbox because I don't want to get too far along. I do want to be cognizant of your guys' time here. So a little bit about us and our story and how we ended up here. Like Josh shared, I met him at camp. That was my first camp that I've ever been to that was a Christian camp as like a 24-year-old. I'm 32 now. That was like, I guess I might have been 25 or something like that. All that to say, I didn't know Jesus growing up. I was raised in the church. I grew up Catholic. And I think I fell into this category that many people fall into today. I believed that God was real and that heaven was real and that I was probably going. And I believe that because when I looked around me at Mass on Sunday morning, or I looked around the classroom in high school, I knew I wasn't the worst one there, at least in my mind. You know, I went out partying every weekend in high school, and I got up early and went to church on Sunday. So that's better than those guys that just slept in, right? And so I had this skewed idea of what it meant. You know, I had never really faced any tough questions about would I actually go to heaven if I died. And when somebody asked me the question, sure, Jake, you think you're going to heaven, but are you 100% sure you're going to heaven? Like that kind of cracked my worldview a little bit. I had to actually deal with the reality of, oh, that might not be true. I didn't know how to answer that question. And so I encourage you guys to find answers to that question if you don't have answers to it. It's really important. But I remember as that realization came to my life where I was like, I am actually in really big trouble because I'm not a good person and I'm not going to heaven. And then it was like, oh yeah, Jesus. You know, because I grew up going to church. I knew about Jesus. I knew what he did for me on the cross, but it never made sense until I realized that I wasn't good. And so it was just amazing after that. I can't say that, oh, that was the specific day, but I remember several months after realizing that, being baptized in the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking in tongues, and I was like, whoa. And my life has never been the same since then. And my wife, completely different story. Some of you guys remember, she did not grow up in the church at all. Her parents are divorced multiple times. Her mother was a sex addict. Her dad went to prison for robbing a bank and selling meth. I mean, just a completely different background than me. And then when God got a hold of her, I mean, it was just like her eyes were open. It was like the scales fell off, and she saw darkness everywhere. And it was an intense moment for her. But she realized if this kind of evil exists, then God has to exist. And so it was the darkness that drove her to the light. And she's never put her Bible down since that day. And we met shortly after that happened in Atlantic, Iowa. And it's just been so cool. So it was at that camp I heard Joseph Gordon speaking. And he was talking about these unreached people groups in India that he was sharing with. And I did the cliche thing in the back of the room. I said, God, if this is real, if you want me to go, you got to tell my wife too. Because we had just been married like a month at the time. And so those of you that are married, you understand that's a new season. Being newlyweds, that was wild. And then God was stirring things up again. And so he did that, and fall conference came that year. We were there with our youth, and Dick Brogdon was the speaker. If you don't know who he is, YouTube the man. But put your seatbelt on if you're going to listen to his videos. And he shared more about those unreached people groups, people that are less than 2% evangelical Christian with little or no access to the gospel. And he asked the question that night, under whose authority are you staying? And that changed our life forever. And so that's kind of how we ended up in Sri Lanka. We sent an email after that conference, and we ended up in Sri Lanka. I mean, it sounds crazy. God didn't write it in the sky. You guys, don't over-spiritualize this call to ministry or missions. You know, if God is putting this desire in your heart, that's what he did for us. We heard about unreached people groups, and it broke our heart, and all of a sudden we wanted to do something about it. That's not Jake. That's not my fleshly desire. I knew that desire was from God, and we stepped into that desire and sent an email. You know, like, oh, how spiritual is that? You know? But it reminded me of Psalms. I can't remember the Psalm specifically off the top of my head. It might be 37, where it says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And I remember the first time hearing that, I thought, wow, this is great. If I delight myself in the Lord, he's going to give me everything I want. But that's not what that's saying, you guys. My wife and I, we were baby Christians. We were devouring our Bible. We were in the church every minute the doors were open. We were truly delighting ourselves in the Lord. And he continued to give us these desires to serve in the church with our youth. And then to go overseas as missionaries. These were not things that we wanted to do, not our flesh, but God gave us that desire. So I encourage you, if you're here this morning going through some just struggles in your life, and you're maybe the words of Jesus are echoing in the back of your mind like they have been in mine these last several months that we've been back in the United States. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do the things that I ask? Maybe those are ringing in your brain because you just feel guilty about the way you're living. Maybe it's small pieces of your life. Maybe it's your whole life right now. Maybe you've never followed the Lord, and now you're hearing those words and thinking, what in the world? You guys, I had to come to this realization that I wasn't doing the things Jesus was asking me to do. And I had to stop and ask myself why. And it was because I wanted to do what I wanted to do more than I wanted to do what he wanted me to do, if that makes sense. There was no desire, the desire to follow Jesus and to do what he wanted me to do was less than the desire to serve myself. I was no longer living dead. And I realized it was because I had slowly but surely stopped delighting in the Lord like I had when I first came to know Jesus. And for those of you that have been following Jesus for a while, you know this ebbs and flows. But man, I hear this all the time, and I remember hearing this growing up, like, just love Jesus, and everything flows from that love of Jesus. But you guys, that is so true. Like, I just want to encourage you just to go back, pray the prayer of David. God, restore me the joy of my salvation. Just go back to delighting in the Lord, and he will start to place these desires in your heart, and you'll be able to do the things Jesus asks you to do. There'll be a desire. You're still going to want to serve yourself. That's why we live dead daily. But the desire to serve Jesus will be greater than the desire to serve yourself. And so that was not part of our story, but we're going to keep moving here, you guys. I just love this, guys. So life in Sri Lanka, what was that like for us? What did you guys do these last 2 years in Sri Lanka? Well, let me tell you a little bit more about that. We spent a lot of time learning the language and diving into the culture, but we also had some really amazing opportunities. So I want to keep flipping through some of these slides here. This was a group of Sri Lankan pastors who God has placed a call in their life to plant the church where the church does not exist. And this is really exciting, you guys. These guys don't have a lot of support from the local church. And so, because they're awesome leaders. These pastors have been training these people to be leaders, ideally of their church. And now God is calling them somewhere else. And they're like, no, I want you guys to stay here. And so they don't get a lot of support, unfortunately. But we've been able to work with our team members in Sri Lanka to bring them together for fellowship and for some training. You guys, what you have here on Sunday morning is so special compared to the rest of the world. These people that are on that last slide there, they don't have this. Some of them don't have this within hundreds of miles, you guys. They don't have an option to gather with other believers. They're in villages, and they're there to plant the church, and the village knows they're there to plant the church, and they don't like that. Their kids don't get to go to school at the local school. They don't get to buy groceries at the local grocery store or even the local stands sometimes, because of why they're in these villages. And they don't have this time of fellowship. They get it every other month sometimes, and that's it. And that's because of this church planting cohort that they've put together. And so don't take for granted these moments. But you guys have brought these guys together. You've been a small part of this gathering to encourage them and to give them the tools to help them reach their communities. And so it's been a blessing to be a part of that. The next slide there was one of our last life group meetings that we had, which is the Bible study that we do in our home every week. We did this one at a coffee shop because we encouraged people to invite more of their family or their friends, and you can see some head coverings there. One of the girls brought her mother with her, and it was so cool to be able to meet her and for her to hear stories from the Bible, straight from the Bible for the first time, not this distorted Muslim view of the story from the Bible, the actual words of God. And it's so cool. You guys, like, many of these people have never seen a physical Bible, especially the ones up there with head coverings. And for them to hold that in their hand for the first time and to hear the words of God come straight from the Bible, for the first time. Like, you guys were a part of that. It was amazing, amazing thing to be a part of. And these people, many of them will never set foot in a church for their first experience with the Word of God. Their culture doesn't allow it. Their families don't allow it. Some of them, it would literally cost them to life to be seen walking out of a church by the wrong person. And so being able to have these gatherings in our home is so important because it gives them a safe space to go and to hear the Word of God for the very first time. And many of these people just want a place to feel loved and belong. You know, just like you guys. I hope you feel loved and that you belong here. If you don't, like we say at Celebrate Recovery, just keep coming back and plug in, you know. Go to small groups. You're not going to feel it if you just sneak in and sneak out every Sunday morning. You got to engage a little bit. But I know you're here because something feels different. Let's keep moving here. This was the story of Pius. And so he was a Muslim from Pakistan. What's he doing in Sri Lanka? I'm glad you asked. His family tried to kill him because he wanted to become a Christian. They didn't know that, but he stopped going to mosque and started doing some Christian-like things in their mind, and they hired people to try to kill him. And so he ended up in Sri Lanka as a refugee right around the time we were really kicking off our life group. And so we got connected with him through our area director. He started coming to our life group, and we were able to start a discipleship with him. And he was such a blessing to have there because he was a Muslim, and now he loves Jesus. And many of the people in our life group are Muslims. And so when we get to have conversations with Pius around the table at these life groups, he's talking to Samantha and I like these other people don't exist. And he's saying some extremely offensive things about Islam that we could never say. And the other people are leaning in. If we said it, their walls would come up immediately. Like they would probably storm out of the room. But Pius is there just sharing his story. And it's been such a blessing. The next slide here is one of our Buddhist friends that we met early on in Sri Lanka. This picture was taken in Dubuque, Iowa. Yeah, tell me that God doesn't orchestrate just some beautiful stories. We met her in Sri Lanka. She was already married to a guy from Wisconsin, and they'd been spending the last 5 years or so trying to get her to come to the United States. She was very Buddhist. Her mother we went over to her home several times, and her mother was always in the living room doing her chants to Buddha. You know, and that was the life that she lived. And she started coming to our life group. And her worldview started cracking a little bit. And she had met some Christians in Colombo before. She knew some Catholic people as well. And so she had heard about Jesus, but never once had she ever heard a story from the Bible. And God started moving in her life. Before she left Sri Lanka, she told her mother that she wanted to become a Christian, which is essentially like not a physical slap in the face, but like she basically slapped her mom in the face and said, everything you believe, everything our ancestors have believed, I think is wrong. Like in an honor-shame culture, that's a really big deal. And you guys, she was baptized this past August at a church in Wisconsin there. And her husband was baptized at a church. He was not a believer when she moved back to the United States. Immediately they started going to church because she was pursuing Jesus, and now they're pursuing God together. Like, you guys, this is your story. The next slide here is one of my favorite people, my wife. No, and one of our favorite people as a couple. Her name is Shamla, and she's still a Muslim. But you guys, she is pursuing truth more than anybody I've met so far in Sri Lanka. And Samantha has had some amazing conversations with her. And guys, she's close. So I want you to be praying for her, you know, by name. Her name is Shamla. Pray for her, you guys. She is part of your story. She has heard the gospel message for the first time because of you guys. Because she's been able to have a safe place to come and hear about Jesus, a safe place to come and ask questions, and to be a part of what he's doing. And so, yeah, it's amazing, you guys. Let's keep moving here. I'm going to wrap things up here shortly. So what's next? Guys, we are so excited to be able to go back to Sri Lanka. And one of the things we realized while we were there is that God was there long before we ever showed up. Okay? Like, this is not a mistake that he brought us there. The time he brought us there, we thought COVID was the worst time to go. Everybody is so open to hearing about Jesus right now. And I think that's true all over the world, but I'm going to step off that soapbox for now. It's exciting. I'm super excited to get to go back, okay? When we were there, we got to meet with Convoy of Hope. They came and they're talking about doing some projects on the east coast of Sri Lanka, predominantly Hindu and Buddhist area, predominantly Hindu and Muslim area, one of the least reached places of Sri Lanka. And so one of the times I was doing some discipleship with my brother Pius up there, we're at a coffee shop, and he came with a question that day. He said, Jake, how does God speak to us? And that's a wonderful question, brother. And so we walked through some stories in the Bible where, God used a donkey and God uses other people and God speaks directly to his people. All these different examples. And I said, Pius, I've even heard people talk about how God will use complete strangers to speak into your life. They'll say something and you'll just know that that was of God. And like 3 minutes later, I'm talking to the barista paying for our coffee, and he knew that we were leaving Sri Lanka and that we're looking at investing in business and things like that and coming back because God has called us to Sri Lanka. He knows these things, but he doesn't know that Convoy of Hope was there. And what he said to me just rocked me. He's like, brother, I think when you come back to Sri Lanka, you should invest in agriculture on the east coast of Sri Lanka. And that's exactly what Convoy of Hope is wanting to do in Sri Lanka. And so I go back to my table and I tell Pius this story, and he just looks me dead in the face. He goes, brother, like you just told me God speaks to us like this. Like, tell me that wasn't God speaking to you. And so we're pursuing that as if that is our next step. And what Convoy is allowing us to do, that partnership would allow us to do, was give us access to these villages where those pastors are, where they're not welcome because they're there to plant the church. Well, if they show up because they're there to help the community with agriculture needs, with food scarcity needs, with all these things that Convoy wants to do, that's awesome. They will be welcomed into the community. Their kids will be welcomed at the school. Even though they're there to plant the church, they can point to this legitimate reason for being there and say, hey, this is why we're here. And so it allows them to have access into these communities. And so we're really excited about that partnership. And what that could bring for church planting there in some of these least reached places of Sri Lanka. You can keep moving through these slides here. Why is this important, you guys? Especially now, in the last couple of weeks, more than ever, we've been talking of the second coming of Jesus. Some of you guys might remember this quote from the first time we were here. Half the world has never even heard that he came. That's a big deal. You guys, we talked about this morning. We sang about it. All the earth will shout your praise. That's going to happen. You guys, I want so many people to be ready for that. There's so many people that aren't ready for that. Let's keep moving. And so this is another QR code opportunity. You guys can zoom in. You can scan that, and that allows you to get our newsletters on a weekly basis. Because I want you guys to be praying for us. I really do. And that also gives you an opportunity to give us support, to join our Facebook group, all those things. And you might not be able to catch it, but if you zoom in, it'll scan for you guys, I promise. I also have a table out there. You guys can come and you can sign up for newsletters and stuff there. And we can talk more about some of these things I've been sharing. I think I have a video up there. I'd love to play that quick here, and then I'll wrap up after that.
Sri Lanka is the most beautiful country because of the colors in it and the culture. Now there's a culture here. To be Sri Lankan, if you're Sri Lankan, you have to be Buddhist. Though the Christianity number is a little more higher than it used to be, I would say 22 million Sri Lankans still need Christ. Roughly little close to 1 year, like 5 to 7 families we saw coming into Christ. That was the first group of believers who accepted Christ in this village. So one day we saw a poster saying that you are not welcome here. You need to pack your bag and leave, or we will take your life. It was normal Saturday. We had gone to sleep expecting the Sunday morning prayer time. My wife at 3 a.m. in the morning, it was God saying like, be ready, be prepared. I heard this big noise, and then I heard the second one. I felt that it was hit on my roof. Then I got out of the bed, and then when I looked up, my whole roof was on fire. And then suddenly it was like a vacuum cleaner. It sucked out all the smoke and the fire. Later, when the police came in and he asked me, did you extinguish the fire? How come still the petrol on your door? And there is no way you can get rid of fire while the petrol is there. Then the person who do black magic said, surely there must have been a great power with you. That's why you are saved today. God allowed that to happen to show how powerful is God. I was ready to give my life for few people, but more than that, I must live for more people. 18,000 more people in the village still need to hear the gospel, and I don't want to see my nation go to hell. I don't want to see that. This nation needs Christ. We need people who needs to give legs for the gospel. Come to this nation, look at the cross. That's what God have done for you. What have you done for you? Just think about that.
That's what he's done for you. What have you done for him? What are you going to do for him? You know, I mentioned briefly that I'd love for you guys to be praying for me. You can throw that QR code back up there for those that missed it. What are you going to do for him, you guys? I don't expect all of you guys out here to spend hours and hours in prayer for my wife and I, or for the nations, or for the lost people across the street. But I do expect 100% of you guys in this room to be praying for lost people. At some point today, tomorrow, at some point in your life, you need to start praying for people that don't know Jesus. All of you need to do that, 100% participation. And I expect the same when it comes to giving. I love the goal for Speed the Light, $10,000. That's amazing. What if your goal moving forward is 100% participation in that goal? You can't all give thousands of dollars. I know that, but you can all give something, and you should all be giving something. It doesn't have to be a lot. Every Sunday, you guys take up an offering. I don't expect you guys to throw thousands of dollars into the basket every Sunday, but I do expect every one of you to be putting something in there. This isn't legalism. It's not about giving your 10%. It's about giving something. Now, you should be tithing, but that's not what this is about. It's about participation, and I believe the same thing is true for the Great Commission. Jesus told us all to go and do what? Make disciples. I don't expect you all to go to Sri Lanka to make disciples, or to some other nation to make disciples, but I, and so does God, expect you to make disciples. Every single one of you, 100% participation. And so I just want to leave you with that, you guys. Participate. And if you don't want to participate, go back to just delighting yourself in the Lord. And all at once, you'll have this desire to participate. So thank you, guys.